All right. Well, really excited to have you here today, man. I'm here with Ahmed Baba, old friend. We've known each other for years at this point. Tremendous respect for the work that you do and kind of the reputation that you've built online and in media. And really wanted to have you on today to kind of talk about kind of this intersection of technology and misinformation and security and politics. And you're just a very important voice. So thank you for being here, man.
Thank you, man. I'm happy to be here. We always have really good, big picture conversations. So,
Agreed.
I remember back in the Millennials Don't Suck podcast days, just always with the great convos. So I was happy to come through.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Well, let's get into it a little bit. I think before we kind of dive into a lot of the meat of this conversation, maybe it would be worth just telling us a little bit about your background, how you came into kind of the worlds that you're in. Yeah, let's just start from wherever you want to start from.
Yeah, so I guess I could start from the present and then kind of go back because,
Perfect.
right now I'm a journalist, nonprofit consultant, and tech entrepreneur, which is kind of a lot of different things at once. But, it's interesting because I started in technology, where my first few jobs were in tech, and I worked in a Microsoft enterprise software company and I was doing I worked on the back end side, the cloud stuff, and then I got more into sales engineering. So my background is tech, and a lot of people don't know that because they think they see my writing or my columns in the Independent or my Substack, and they just think, oh, I'm just political journal by trade. But in actuality, I started in tech, and then when Trump started to run for office in 2015, me and my friend Zach, we decided to just launch this blog, and we just started blogging, and that's when I first met you. So then that's kind of how we got into media, because then the blog really took off, and then now it's turned into this company which was Rant Media, where we were publishing and I was documenting every day of the Trump presidency, and through that got a real stranglehold on disinformation and got to be able to see just how technology is impacting our society and politics. And then from there, it brought me up to now where I do disinformation media literacy
Hmm.
lectures for college students. That started doing that 2 years ago,
Cool.
and now I'm kind of intersecting with Rant's built an app that's in beta, that's kind of private community-esque. So just a lot of different things going on at the same time. I believe in the same kind of shift towards private internet that you do.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's just a real convergence of interests going on
Totally.
here.
Yeah, it's kind of like the ultimate Venn diagram of like if you're interested in misinformation and kind of how the ripple effects that it has across society, like you're going to inevitably, have a foot in the political world, have a foot in the technological world, have a foot in the sort of the media world, because that's where it's happening. Like it's all meeting in that nexus. To that point, you've been at this a long time. In our current, I think there's a lot of I think AI has kind of introduced a new sort of a new type of fear around like this idea of misinformation or about, objective truth or that sort of thing. As somebody who's on the ground, like what do you find most frustrating about kind of the current paradigm around, I guess, like trust and how we are sort of losing our ability to trust or losing our ability to discern what's real and what's fake?
Yeah, what's been really frustrating to me is really this kind of rise in an authoritarianism, this kind of collaborative thing we see happening with like the edgelords online. We've got Elon Musk, and then we also have, like Viktor Orban in Hungary. Like you never would have thought those two would coincide if
Right.
you look a few years ago, and you're just seeing this kind of collaborative enterprise to try to gaslight us into believing like the people who are actually fighting disinformation are the ones who are peddling it.
Mm.
Like any use of the word disinformation is somehow, we're the ones that are actually trying to rewrite, and it's this projection, essentially. It's Orwellian accusation of what we're doing is actually the corrupt thing. And when Musk bought Twitter, we've seen a lot of that, because we see that elevation and that effort to shift public opinion being put in the algorithm and in these systems has been one of the most frustrating parts of this, because it's just, they're lying blatantly to our faces a lot of the
And
time.
are there examples of that of sort of like the algorithm shifting certain narratives on what, X.
Yeah, I mean, I know initially when, for example, there was a lot during the fog of war, the initial, Hamas attack on Israel, right? We saw an explosion of the result of like this erosion of trust and safety teams that we've seen at X and other social media companies where this disinformation is just proliferating and people were monetizing it. So we
Hmm.
saw people just sharing clips from other wars from,
Right.
a year ago, like attacks in Syria, and just trying to reframe the debate. So we're seeing it not only used to and if you pay for Twitter Blue, you're elevated in the algorithm.
Right.
So we see, and you can monetize
Right.
those views. So we're
So
seeing,
the incentive structure is like basically the truth doesn't matter. It's about the amplification of whatever the message is that is incentivized.
yeah, essentially we're seeing the attention economy being
Hmm.
given the ultimate tool to just
Hmm.
push this immoral view of any attention is good attention, which we've seen corrupt our politics. We see it
Hmm.
socially. We've seen people game those algorithms on TikTok, Andrew Tate, for example. So really I guess the broad answer to the question of what really concerns me is this algorithmic amplification of disinformation that's right in our faces. But because we don't have the regulation, the necessary transparency
Yeah.
laws in place, we don't know why or how exactly they're working or surfacing that content.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of had this conversation with one of our previous guests, Mo Murghari, about kind of the challenge on the political side is that, we have a political leadership that I don't even know if it's worth them calling unwilling. I think they're just not really able to, they don't understand, these systems, and I think it's a very tough ask to like think about our current Congress, for instance, and be like, oh yeah, they're the people to like figure out how to legislate our way into a more truthful ecosystem.
Yeah, they're definitely not. And that's the worrying part is that we see people like, organizations and lawmakers, in Europe that are taking this way more seriously and more effectively, like the EU AI Act that
Mhm.
recently, that framework that finally moved forward. There's some obviously flaws in parts of it and things you can add or take, but
Yeah.
it's a step, right? And that's not going to happen here, especially as we're seeing this now attempt to make AI partisan. So it's like, certain AI is woke AI
Right.
now, allegedly, whatever
Right.
woke means, given
Right.
whatever determination you want to take, or now, or DEI, or whatever they want to put on it. Essentially, there's this polarization now that wasn't there when it initially dropped that will now make it harder to regulate it. Just
Yeah.
like same thing with social media. So they're not prepared. There are some people like Klobuchar and Blumenthal that do have an understanding, but some of the regulation that they push might go too far. There's also that aspect, like the Child Safety
Yeah.
Act, that they're pushing, goes a little too far in a lot of ways. So it's finding that balance that our political system isn't equipped or prepared to do at the moment.
Yeah. No, completely. Getting kind of into, some of your experiences over the last several years, I know you've kind of developed this public profile. Any crazy stories that have happened just like as a result of being in the public eye?
I mean, there's a lot. It's hard to know where to begin, but I do think, I know some of the previous episodes I watched on this where they talk about specific examples of like whether you knew someone was true or not true. There was one
Yeah.
instance where, my replies are just littered with,
Bots.
bots, and
Yeah.
my DMs are, filled with things like I can't repeat on this podcast. But like there was one time where there was this troll account that was created called Baba Loves Trump.
Mm.
And it was just like just troll, it's dedicated to trolling me. And I was like, I
Yeah. Yeah.
am not nearly famous enough or notable enough for you to have a
Yeah.
dedicated account. And then I came to find out it was one of my old friends,
Whoa, brutal.
and that was one of the craziest things where it's like they just kept tweeting at me, and then I got a text message after one time I dropped my article that was kind of in the same cadence as
Huh.
one of the tweets and one of the same messages. So essentially, if they revealed themselves, and I was like, you've
Yo,
been trolling me, man. Like,
yeah,
like it shows that corrosive. It was an
yeah,
example of that corrosive impact of politics on our, like, even with that trust that you
yeah,
might have interpersonally with
yeah.
someone, that the political system that we were within is so, there's so much animosity that it can turn even your closest people together away from you. And
Yeah, it's really interesting. The way that the sort of our in-person trust networks have been almost irrevocably damaged by, I think what's pretty clear is like algorithmic, like siloing of people. I was having this conversation the other day. Like, I actually think that like, there's obviously the political extremes on the right and the left, but I think most people would like in person like generally would agree on most stuff. And I think that there is like the sort of the amplification that happens of because of the incentives of the yeah, of the attention economy, like these narratives that fuel rage and fuel othering and fuel all this stuff gets they're incentivized to be amplified. And I think that is such a perfect example of like this is somebody that you had a real life relationship with who because of the sort of the mind effingness of how sort of the incentives work online, like did some crazy shit.
yeah, and it's someone you personally trust. It also can,
Yeah,
like, even figures that you trust. You can watch how they can be put into
yeah,
bubbles. Like, I
totally.
also got into, like, now not only did I have a troll that was an old friend, one of the actual crazier things, I got into like a debate with Chance the Rapper on Twitter
Oh wow.
about, he was vouching for Kanye, based
Hmm.
off of some lies he was hearing, and then I had to, like, basically share him Biden's racial policies and stuff. But he was like, no, but Biden's not gonna do anything for Black America. And it's just like you can see how people in their different bubbles in their own personal circles too can be
Hmm.
distorted. Like, he was in the he's chilling with Kanye all the time, who obviously is not saying the right things right now. And
Right.
it's like you have those interpersonal bubbles that can distort you. You have these algorithmic feeds that if you are separated from people in your life as well, like that old friend, where
Yeah.
they just get distorted and gaslit into this alternate reality
Yeah, it's just
where,
like two different worlds.
and there's, they used to have the big three TV networks. Now it's
Yeah.
just the big me. And that's not a Kendrick reference. I actually used to say that in my lectures before. Like, there
Yeah.
was, I'm sure you heard that.
Yeah, yeah. The new
Yeah,
verse.
yeah. The
Yeah,
new
yeah.
verse, but like there's the me network. There's
Yeah.
your individualized algorithmic reality,
Mm-hmm.
and that no one else has something similar to that.
Yeah.
And that is, it's hard for people to break out of it or recognize when that algorithm is manipulating them.
Yeah, because it's and I think, one of the interesting conversations that I had with another guest, Brian Lane, is like I think with AI now, what's really fascinating and scary is like, in 2016, it was sort of like the Facebook ads funneling people to various websites or various Facebook groups where they could be, you know, sort of funneled into certain political views. What I think is fascinating now is because of with AI agents, we are looking at a potential, fall election where somebody, meets somebody on Twitter or on TikTok or wherever that's a bot and invites them to a Discord chat or a WhatsApp group or a Telegram group and says, "Hey, like come join me and all of the people that think like us." And every other person in that group is another AI agent. And it's design and it's so it's like this idea of like went from like sort of one to one to now it's like a many on one essentially attack of like if there's 100 different bots that are all optimized to convince you or nudge you in a particular direction via their conversation and giving you that sort of that sugar pill of community, it's just crazy to imagine kind of where this is going to go with
Yeah.
as 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 our ability to tell what's real and what's fake and who's human and who's not human starts to disappear. And that's really, that's kind of why one of the reasons why, we're trying to push out Kibu is because we feel like knowing. you know, who's real or what's real, who you're talking to is going to become like a pretty critically important thing
Yes.
in the next couple of years.
No, exactly. And I think that that point, that's really interesting. The automated bots that might be populating this Discord or populating this
Yeah,
community that someone enters, that's kind of a microcosm of what we've seen at social media
yeah,
broadly with the fake
totally.
amplification of all of these trends. And now, if you have that invading the private space, then effectively you're going to be getting into a place where who do you trust, right? And that's
Yeah,
why Kibu is so important
yeah,
because of that trust validation factor, where you actually can authentically, basically authenticate that the user is human
yeah,
in there. While these AI models, which I'm concerned about, the ones that are not only out right now, I mean, fortunately, the ones that are, it's called OpenAI, but it's really a closed
yeah,
system.
yeah,
They have their APIs that they can give you, but these other AI models, like there was that leaked Llama AI model from Meta. Like
yep.
when these actual models get in the hands of bad actors and they can retool them to their own ends, and then those models begin interacting in a more scalable way with the outside world. That's the next tier. That's really concerning, and that's why regulation is so needed. And the EU is smart to act as quick as they did because we need those frameworks in place.
To that point, like, are there, whether it's tech on the tech side, like tech advancements or legal decisions that you're keeping an eye on, sort of, we talked kind of about the, I don't think we have a lot of faith in our political system to really do much, but like whether it's the courts or whether it's, any sort of cutting edge tech. I mean, we just talked about obviously, we're trying to do our thing over at Kibu, but like any other technology or laws that are or court decisions that you're keeping an eye on for some of this stuff.
Well, I mean, I'm watching the EU a lot for a lot of this. There was that Epic Games
Yeah, right.
suit, for example, that these anti monopoly practices that then will have cascading effects that can then limit the way that these AI systems can work. I'm also watching this. It's not really unrelated. It may seem unrelated to some people, but just basically, I'm watching chips a lot and how the Chips and Science Act funds are being deployed, and essentially how and Taiwan as well. Like I think whoever basically controls these chips will be able to control the way AI
Yeah,
unfolds. And right now we have one Dutch company that creates
yeah.
you know,
TSML or something? ASML.
yeah, ASML, like the one company that creates these ultraviolet, machines are able to
Yeah,
create the chips. And then we have, the Taiwan Semiconductor Company, the
yeah,
one company that
yeah,
can manufacture them. And then we have NVIDIA, which is the company that designs all of them or 80% of them. And meanwhile, we have in Arizona, they're finally starting to like build
yeah,
up capacity there. And so I'm kind of watching this space to just see, you know, where it's going to go in the US China war on this. So obviously,
yeah,
China's behind on the chips now, but really, whoever can get control of these chips, they're going to be able to dictate what AI systems can operate to the fullest capacity. They need those GPUs, and they're going to be able to control essentially whether or not we're in this kind of US based dogma of AI, NVIDIA's based here, or
uh-huh.
we're in some other future. So I'd say the Chips and Science Act, like on the bigger picture, just of where the AI trends are going to go. That's something that I'm watching on the AI front, and then obviously the recent regulations in EU are things that I'm just watching generally because they're leading the way on whether it's social media regs and all these other data privacy stuff.
Yeah, no, it's really smart. I agree. I think, of course, my geopolitical mind goes to the Taiwan of it all. It's interesting. I don't know if you've paid attention, but it seems like TSMC is kind of starting to move some of its capacity very slowly. Like in Japan seems to be kind of like a place where it's kind of like the bets are being hedged a little bit as like
Mhm.
a potential, because some of the reading I've been doing about like TSMC in Arizona specifically is that they just haven't been able to like the work cultures are very different
Yeah,
and that like TSMC is not super pleased with kind of the how different the work culture is here versus in
of
Taiwan.
course.
And I think Japan perhaps it seems like is a little bit closer to how they operate. And so based on some things I've been hearing, it seems like Japan is kind of like, a more likely destination for some of that capacity.
Yeah,
Um,
because it needs to spread out. It can't be
yeah,
these are choke points where
totally.
if those are disrupted, what happens? Like Chris Miller in his book Chip Wars talks about, there would be actual depressions that could occur. Like
Oh,
if we just stop producing chips because they produce chips for Apple,
a
you
hundred
know,
percent.
the cascading effects are just
Yeah. Well, and I think it's kind of like, yeah, it's interesting. When you think about deterrence, you think about nuclear deterrence, but I think a really interesting other type of deterrence is like, it's kind of like a game of chicken where, if China invades Taiwan, like, yes, they probably eventually could take it, but it would also destroy the global economy of which they rely on. And so, yeah, it's definitely it's going to be an interesting couple of years. I mean, to that end, I asked this question to all of our guests, like, when you think about the next 5, 10 years of security and sort of digital trust, like, what keeps you up at night? Is there a version of reality where you're like, wow, this is not good, that really is having you worried?
the militarized AI aspects that are incredibly concerning. And I really just, we just have to put really good people in power to ensure that we can navigate these challenges that are to come because it's going to be really challenging technological landscape, and these advancements are not for those who aren't really intelligent about this and self-interested. We
Right.
need to have people that are we need to have the technocrats in power right now. Like we need the people who understand this stuff at a deep level, that live and breathe it. Like Lena Khan at the FTC, she's someone who kind of like uh she's only 35 and she's the chair of it, and she's someone in the Biden admin that's like kind of an example of someone who's technocratic and thinking. Buttigieg, like these people who are smarter than what this other administration would bring in. And I
Mm.
really just hope that our power apparatus is not one that is veering towards right-wing authoritarianism and then starts misusing the technology against its own citizens. That's one of my worries.
I mean, sort of conversely, and this will be my last question. What gives you hope? Like when it comes to really this brave new world of AI and misinformation and sort of weaponized attention and all of these things that you and I think about a lot, like, where are the bright spots? Like, what makes you excited for, like, okay, maybe we're gonna figure this out.
Well, obviously Kibu, like
Sure.
like moving towards these private spaces, these more trust-oriented spaces, people are organizing, this internet that is less dependent on other platforms and really based on your own internal trust, and it doesn't have all of these because there's all these other tech dependencies that occur when you're dealing with these bigger social networks. That's on the tech front. That kind of is something that gives me hope. Also, AI being used for good. Small businesses are really able to, in your other episode, you mentioned your florist friend that uses
Yeah.
AI to really
Yeah, yeah.
boost business. Everyone uses it to increase their own capacity and their own ingenuity. And I'm a big Star Trek fan. So like, obviously I hope we don't have that nuclear war
Yeah.
saga that preludes all of that.
Yeah, I did.
But if we have these tools that are able to just automate a lot of our lives, and humans are able to really evolve past that baseline level and can think more creatively and do really cool things with this new technology, that's really something that gives me hope. If again, people that are good people remain at the levers of power. And then mainly, I would just say young people, this next generation, in my opinion, you and I have always been generational optimists.
Yeah.
Millennials don't suck, right? The other podcast.
Yeah.
And Gen Z doesn't suck either, right? I think Gen
Great.
Z is really adept. I've lectured hundreds of kids now and across the country, and these students are they know, like I'm teaching them anti-disinfo tactics, but they get it. They already are using a lot of those tools in their own day-to-day lives, and I feel like they have a lot more of a grasp of society than the older generations do. And I think they have a bullshit detector. I don't know if I'm allowed to cuss on this.
Oh,
That
yeah, yeah.
is, yeah, they got a BS monitor that is really, really keen and sharp. And I think we'd be in good hands if younger people are put in positions of power and are able to like navigate this landscape. So those are some of the things that make me hopeful.
Very well said. Well, dude, It's always so good to talk to you. I so respect you and the work that you've done and continue to do. And like, I mean, I didn't even know that you were doing this disinfo lecturing, but that's just it's incredible. That work is so needed, and those kids are really lucky that they get to learn from you. So thank you for your time and your wise words, and just excited to continue to see what you do and the change that you make in the world.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you inviting me on and keep doing the work you're doing, man. It's really important.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate it.